Give her the coat, he told himself. She'll die without it. He gave it anyway, his dead father's coat, his only armor against a Montana winter that was trying to kill everything that moved. He gave it to a girl he'd never seen before, shaking so hard her teeth were cracking together, eyes wild with something worse than cold. He gave her his last $20 too. Then he walked away into the dark and the storm swallowed him whole. He had no idea what he'd just started. If this is your first time here, subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end and drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Garrett Miller had been working double shifts for 11 days straight when the night tried to finish him. It wasn't dramatic. That was the thing about being broke and exhausted in a town like Billings, Montana in the dead of February. Nothing about it was dramatic. It was just gray. Gray morning, gray afternoon, gray dark that came down hard at 4:30 and stayed until 7 the next day. The cold wasn't romantic either. It wasn't the kind of cold that made you feel alive. It was the kind that got into your joints and reminded you that you were running on empty and had been for longer than you wanted to admit. He was 29 years old and he already felt 50. He closed Pioneer Garage at 9 that night. His boss, Dale Hutchins, had gone home at 6 like he always did, leaving Garrett to finish the brake job on a 2009 Silverado and lock up by himself. Dale wasn't a bad man. He paid on time mostly. He didn't yell, but he also didn't notice that Garrett had been skipping lunch for 3 weeks to stretch the cash he had left, and he didn't ask questions when Garrett showed up looking like something a dog had dragged in from the cold. That was fine. Garrett didn't want questions. Questions led to conversations, and conversations led to the specific kind of pity that made a man feel smaller than the problem already did. He owed $140,000. He didn't think about that number all at once. That was survival. You broke it into pieces small enough to carry. This week's interest payment on his mother's medical debt. The utility bill that was 11 days past due. The rent that was coming up, and the checking account that had $63 in it. You thought about those pieces and you didn't look at the hole because the hole would sit on your chest and stop you from breathing. His mother, Carol Miller, had been fighting kidney disease for 4 years. The first 2 years had wiped out what little savings they had. The last 2 had put Garrett in debt to a financing company called Medallion Credit Partners, which was a polite name for an organization that charged 22% interest on medical loans and had a collection department that called his cell phone at 7 in the morning. He'd taken the loan because there was no other option. His mother needed dialysis 3 times a week, and the bills didn't stop just because a mechanic in Billings was already working 60 hours and had nothing left. That was the shape of his life. He pulled on his coat before he stepped out into the alley behind the garage. It was his father's coat, a heavy Carhartt forest green worn at the elbows with his dad's initials scratched into the inside tag in blue ballpoint RM Robert Miller. His father had been dead 6 years, and the coat was the only thing of his that Garrett still had. Everything else had gone during the lean years, the tools, the watch, the truck his dad had restored on weekends. The coat had stayed because Garrett wore it every single day from October to April, and because letting it go would have felt like letting the last of the man go with it, and he wasn't ready for that. He had the collar up and his hands in his pockets, and he was thinking about nothing except the half-mile walk to his apartment and whether there was anything in the fridge worth eating when he heard it. Not a voice, not right away, just a sound, a wet, ragged sound, like someone trying to breathe through a cloth that was soaked through. He stopped. The alley behind Pioneer Garage backed up against a row of dumpsters in a chain-link fence that separated the property from an abandoned lot. There was no lighting except what spilled from the garage's rear security lamp, and that light didn't reach far. He stood there for 2 full seconds telling himself it was nothing, a dog, a bag caught in the wind, and then the sound came again, and this time it had a shape to it. It was a person. He moved toward the fence and found her wedged between the back of the dumpster and the wall. Her knees pulled to her chest, her arms wrapped around herself in the specific way that people wrap themselves when the wrapping isn't working anymore. She was young, 17, maybe 18. Blonde hair plastered to the side of her face, which was a shade of white that had gone past pale into something that genuinely frightened him. She was wearing a denim jacket over a hoodie, and neither one of them was doing a thing against a night that was sitting at 9 degrees Fahrenheit with a wind chill that pushed it lower. She looked up at him, and her eyes were huge and terrified, and her teeth were hammering together so hard he could hear them from 3 feet away. Don't, she started. Hey. He put both hands up, open palms out. I work here. I'm not going to hurt you. She stared at him. The terror didn't leave her eyes, but something in it shifted a small recalibration, like she was running a fast calculation on whether he was the kind of danger she knew or a different kind she hadn't accounted for. How long have you been out here? He asked. She didn't answer. Listen to me, Garrett said, and he crouched down so he wasn't standing over her. Your lips are blue. That's not an expression. They are actually blue. Do you understand what that means? She understood. He could see it in her face. She understood and she was scared, and she wasn't moving, which meant something was keeping her in that alley that was worse than the cold. Are you running from someone? Her jaw tightened. Even through the shaking, even through the hypothermia pulling at the edge of her, she had a stubbornness in her face that told him she wasn't going to answer that. Okay, he said, you don't have to tell me anything. He was already pulling off his coat. Here. No, she pulled back. I don't want. It's not a trade, he said. I'm not asking for anything. It's a coat. You need it more than I do right now. You'll freeze. I live half a mile from here. I'll be fine. He held it out toward her. She looked at it for a long moment, the worn elbows, the weight of it, the warmth that was still radiating off the inside from his body. Heat, and then something in her cracked, just a little, the way ice cracks before it gives, and she took it. She pulled it around herself, and her eyes closed for half a second, and he watched some of the shaking begin to ease. Not all of it, nowhere near all of it, but enough. There's a diner, he said, 24-hour place. You go out the alley, turn left on 2nd, it's 3 blocks down. Blue sign. They'll leave you alone as long as you order something. He reached into his jeans pocket and pulled out his wallet. $23. He took out the 20 and held it toward her. I can't take your money, she said. Then give it back to me later. Right now, take it. She took it. He stood up. His flannel shirt immediately registered the cold. It hit him like a wall, fast and mean, the kind of cold that doesn't announce itself but just starts working on you. What's your name? She asked. Garrett? She nodded. Then quietly, I'm Harper. Okay, Harper. Get to that diner. Get something hot. Don't stay outside. He walked away before she could say anything else, because if he stood there any longer, the cold was going to become a real problem. And he also had the distinct sense that staying would complicate something he didn't fully understand yet. There was a quality to her fear that wasn't ordinary. It wasn't the fear of a kid who'd run away from a bad home or missed a bus. It was the fear of someone who had a very specific reason to be hiding in a very specific alley, and Garrett Miller had enough problems of his own without walking into someone else's. He turned up the collar of his flannel and put his head down and started walking. The wind came off the rim rocks that night with a ferocity that felt almost personal. Within 2 blocks, he'd lost feeling in his ears. Within 4, he couldn't feel his fingers through the flannel. He tucked his hands under his arms and kept moving, and told himself he was fine. He was almost there. Half a mile wasn't a distance he'd worked outside in worse. He hadn't actually, not without the coat. By the time he hit the intersection of 2nd and Alderson, he was shaking hard enough that his footsteps had become uncoordinated, and there was a sleepiness creeping at the edges of his awareness that he recognized dimly through the cold fog as something he should be alarmed by. Hypothermia started in the extremities and worked inward. He knew this the same way he knew how engines worked, practically not academically. He was 2 blocks from his building. He started counting steps. He got to 200 before the counting stopped making sense. And then he was at the door of his building and his hand couldn't work the key properly, and he stood in the entryway for a full 3 minutes before he could get the key to turn. He made it to his apartment on the 2nd floor. He made it to the bathroom. He turned the shower to warm, not hot. You didn't go straight to hot, and sat on the floor of the tub with his clothes still on while the water ran over him. He sat there for a long time. The next morning, his body ached in a way that was different from the standard mechanic ache, the kind that lived in his lower back and his knuckles. This was deeper. His chest felt thick and his joints felt wrong, like someone had drained all the fluid out of them. He called into work and left a message for Dale that he was sick. He hadn't called in sick in 14 months. He lay on his couch under every blanket he owned and drifted in and out of something that wasn't quite sleep for most of the day. His fever peaked around noon. He had no way of knowing that. He just knew that there was a period where the ceiling looked wrong and his thoughts weren't tracking, and he drank water from a bottle he'd had the foresight to set on the coffee table before things got bad. By the second day, he could sit up. By the third, he could stand without the room moving. He went back to work on Thursday morning, 3 days after the alley. He'd lost 7 pounds. His face in the bathroom mirror had a hollow quality to it, and there was a cough sitting low in his chest that hadn't been there before. He didn't think about the girl, or he tried not to. He thought about her a little, about whether she'd gotten to the diner, whether the 20 had been enough, whether she'd found somewhere safe to be. He hoped she had. He also hoped she'd found her way to wherever she was supposed to be, because the alternative, the idea that she was still out there somewhere in a Billings February, was not something he wanted to carry. He had enough to carry. Pioneer Garage on a Thursday morning was the same as it always was. Dale's truck in its spot, the shop, radio playing country, and weather reports, the smell of oil and metal, and the particular cold that lived in a concrete-floored space even when the space heaters were running. Garrett had his first cup of coffee from the machine in the back office and started pulling the day's order tickets. Brake job on a Jeep Cherokee, exhaust on a Ford F-150 that had been limping in every 4 months for 2 years. Oil change inspection. He was 40 minutes into the Cherokee when the sound hit the building. He heard it before he understood it. It started as a vibration, a low, synchronized rumble that his body registered before his ears sorted it into sound. His hand stopped moving on the caliper. The shop radio was playing something about a cold front, and then the rumble grew large enough to override it, and Dale came to the door of the office and looked out through the shop windows, and his face did something complicated. "Garrett Malmaison," Dale said. "I hear it." The rumble hit its peak, and then the engine sounds began cutting out one by one in a sequence that meant stopping, meant parking, meant staying. Garrett straightened from the Cherokee and looked through the shop's front glass and saw them. 12 motorcycles. They were staged in a formation that wasn't accidental. 2 columns staggered the way a military unit moves, and every one of them was a full dresser, Harley in black or dark chrome. The riders didn't get off their bikes immediately. They stayed on them for a moment, and that moment was its own kind of language. The street had gone quiet. The 2 other cars that had been moving on that block were both stopped, their drivers clearly uncertain whether to pass or wait, instinctively applying the same caution you'd apply around something large and unpredictable. Then the man at the front of the formation got off his bike. He was not a small man. He was somewhere in his early 50s, built like someone who had spent decades doing physical work, that had laid muscle over bone in a way that didn't come from a gym. His face carried a scar that ran from his left cheekbone down to the jaw, not the kind of scar that came from an accident, but the kind that came from something more deliberate. His vest was full-patched Hell's Angels, and he moved with the controlled economy of someone who had been in enough situations that urgency didn't register on him the same way it registered on ordinary people. He was carrying something. Garrett's eyes went to it before he knew why they did. A coat, forest green, worn at the elbows. The man walked directly toward the front door of Pioneer Garage. Garrett set down his wrench. Dale had gone very still in the door of his office. The other mechanic on shift, a kid named Travis who was 22 and had worked there 8 months, had stopped pretending to work and was standing with a socket wrench in his hand, doing nothing useful with it. The front door opened. The man stepped inside and stopped. He looked at the garage the way men look at a space they've already decided they own. Not aggressive, not threatening, just very, very settled. He let his eyes move across the space until they found Garrett, which took about 4 seconds. "You the one who closed this place last Tuesday night," he said. His voice was even. Not loud. It didn't need to be loud. Garrett felt the coat in the man's hand and felt something cold that had nothing to do with the temperature move through him. "Yeah," he said. The man held up the coat. "You know what this is?" Garrett looked at it. The worn elbows. The left front pocket where he'd torn the lining years ago and never fixed it. His father's initials scratched into the tag that he couldn't see from here but knew were there. "Yes, sir," he said. "That's mine." Silence. Behind the man through the front glass, the 11 other riders had gotten off their bikes. They weren't moving toward the garage. They were just standing there, and they didn't need to do anything else. "My name is Grip," the man said, "and I think you met my daughter Tuesday night." The garage was completely silent except for the shop radio, which was still playing weather and which nobody moved to turn off. Garrett stood at the side of the Cherokee with his hands at his sides and understood with a clarity that was surprisingly calm given the circumstances that this was the moment his life was going to go one way or another way, and that the direction it went depended entirely on what he said in the next 30 seconds. He had given his dead father's coat to this man's daughter. This man had ridden here with 11 other Hells Angels and parked in front of his workplace. And right now, standing very still in a Montana garage on a Thursday morning, Garrett Miller stepped forward and told the truth. "Yes, sir," he said, "I did." Grip looked at him for a long moment. His expression hadn't changed, hadn't warmed, hadn't hardened, hadn't given anything away. "How'd she look?" he said. Garrett didn't hesitate. "She was hypothermic. She'd been out in that cold for a while before I found her. Her lips were already blue. She was shaking bad." "And you gave her your war coat?" "I did." "Why?" Not a question, a demand, an honest flat demand for an honest flat answer. "Because she was going to die without it," Garrett said. "There wasn't really another option." Grip studied him. "You gave her money too." $20. Sent her to the diner on 2nd, told her to get something hot. "You touch her." There it was. Garrett had felt it coming from the moment the man had walked in, felt the shape of it under all the other questions. And now here it was clean and direct the way a blade is clean and direct. "No," he said, "I didn't touch her." He held the man's gaze. He did not look away because looking away was the wrong answer to that question, even if the words were right. Grip looked at him for 5 seconds that felt significantly longer. Then he looked down at the coat in his hand. Something moved in his face, not much, not anything you'd call emotion unless you were watching very carefully, and then he looked back up at Garrett and said very quietly, "She's in the hospital." The word landed in the silence of the garage like something dropped. "She made it to the diner," Grip continued, "but she was in worse shape than she knew. They called an ambulance." A pause. "She's alive." Garrett let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. "The coat," Grip said, and he held it out, and his voice had shifted by a fraction, some quality in it that Garrett couldn't fully name. "The nurses said she wouldn't let go of it all 3 days." He held it out further. His eyes were steady on Garrett's face. Garrett took a step forward. He reached out and took his father's coat from the hands of the most dangerous man he'd ever been in a room with. Outside through the front glass, 11 Hells Angels stood in the cold and didn't move and didn't have to. And Garrett Miller stood in the middle of Pioneer Garage holding his dead father's coat and understanding, with the particular clarity that only comes to people who have been very close to something irreversible, that the thing that had happened Tuesday night in an alley had not finished happening. It had only just started. Grip didn't leave. That was the first thing Garrett understood once the initial shock of the moment began to settle. The man hadn't come just to return the coat and walk out. He stood in the middle of Pioneer Garage with his hands loose at his sides and his eyes moving around the space the way a man's eyes move when he's reading a room cataloging it, and Garrett had the very clear sense that whatever came next hadn't been scripted yet, that Grip was deciding something in real time. Dale had disappeared into his office. Travis had found a reason to be in the parts room. The shop radio played on cheerful and oblivious, and the 11 men outside hadn't moved from their bikes. "You got somewhere we can talk," Grip said. Garrett nodded toward the back of the shop. "Office." They walked back there together, which was one of the stranger experiences of Garrett's life, walking side by side through his own workplace with a scarred Hells Angels enforcer who outweighed him by 40 pounds, past the tool chests in the lift and the Cherokee that still had its wheels off through the door into the narrow back office that smelled like coffee and old paperwork. Dale was at his desk. He looked up and saw Grip and stood immediately. "I can," Dale started. "Stay," Grip said. "Not a suggestion." Dale stayed. Grip sat in the chair across from the desk without being invited to and looked at Garrett. "Tell me again," he said. "From the beginning. Everything you remember." So Garrett told him. All of it closing up the sound from behind the dumpster the way Harper had been sitting, the blue lips, the shaking. He told it the way he would have told it to a cop, clean and sequential, leaving nothing out and adding nothing that wasn't there. He told him about the coat, about the $20, about the diner on 2nd Street. Grip listened without interrupting. His face was still during most of it, but his jaw worked once when Garrett described how blue her lips were. When Garrett finished, the office was quiet. "She called me from the diner," Grip said finally, 40 minutes after you left her. I was in Missoula." He stopped. "By the time I got back, the ambulance had already taken her." "I didn't know she'd need an ambulance," Garrett said. "She was talking. She was coherent." Hypothermia doesn't announce itself on the way out the same way it does on the way in. Grip's voice was flat but not cold, just honest. "She was further gone than either of you knew." Garrett nodded. 3 days in the hospital, Grip said. "Core temperature was 92 when they brought her in. Another hour in that alley and the coat wouldn't have mattered." The number landed, 92 degrees, 4 degrees below the line where the body starts making decisions about which organs to keep warm and which ones to let go. "She made it," Garrett said. "She made it." Grip looked at his hands. "Because you gave her that coat." The word "because" sat in the office between them like something physical. Dale was very still at his desk. He'd been so still for so long that Garrett had half forgotten he was there. Grip looked up from his hands. "I'm going to ask you something," he said. "And I want you to answer it the same way you've been answering everything else. Straight. Okay. Why were you in that alley at 9 at night in February without a car?" Garrett looked at him. "I live half a mile away. I walk." "You walk in February in Montana at 9 at night." "I don't have a car." Grip was quiet for a moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not pity, nothing soft enough to call pity, but a kind of recalibration, the same kind he'd done in front of the garage when Garrett had first answered him straight. "How long you been working here?" Grip asked. 3 years. "And Dale?" Grip glanced at Dale without warmth or hostility. "Pays you what?" Dale looked at Garrett. Garrett looked at Grip. "Enough," Garrett said. "Enough to live half a mile away and walk to work in February," Grip said. It wasn't a question. Garrett didn't answer it like one. "I manage," he said. Grip studied him for 5 seconds. Then he stood up and the conversation was over in the way conversations ended when the person running them decided they were done. "You're going to hear from me," Grip said. "I'm not looking for anything," Garrett said immediately. "I didn't help her for—" "I know that." Grip said it with a finality that closed the door on the subject. "I know that because if you were looking for something, you would have stayed in that alley. You would have gotten her name and you would have worked out who she belonged to inside of 24 hours because in this town, that's not hard." He picked up his vest collar, settled it. "You gave her the coat and you walked into a storm and you damn near killed yourself doing it. I know what that is." He walked out of the office and back through the shop and out the front door without looking back. Garrett stood in the office doorway and watched through the front glass as Grip mounted his bike, and then the formation started up, 12 engines one by one, until the sound was a single wall of noise, and then they were gone and 2nd Street looked like it always did, gray and cold and ordinary. Travis came out of the parts room. What, Travis said, was that? "Go back to work," Garrett said. He didn't tell anyone about the conversation. Not that there was anyone to tell. He didn't have the kind of friendships that involved phone calls to explain your day. His mother was in a care facility on the south side of Billings, and he visited her on Sundays. And the visits were good, but they were also the kind of good that had sadness underneath it. The kind that came from watching someone you loved living smaller and smaller inside their own body. He went to see her that Sunday, and she asked him how work was, and he said fine. And she said he looked tired, which she always said because he always was. And he sat with her for 2 hours and they watched a game show she liked, and he held her hand and didn't think about Grip or Harper or the 11 men on motorcycles who'd parked on his street like a weather event. He thought about them on the drive back. He thought about them because he couldn't not. Because Grip had said, "You're going to hear from me," with a certainty that wasn't threatening, but also wasn't optional the way gravity wasn't optional. And Garrett had learned early in life that when men who understood consequence made statements like that, the statements were worth taking seriously. He just didn't know what hearing from Grip meant. He didn't know if it was good or bad or both or neither. He found out on Wednesday. He was under the F-150 working the exhaust when Travis came back and crouched down and said, "Garrett, there's someone here." "Tell them to wait." "It's a girl." He slid out from under the truck. She was standing just inside the front door, and she was wearing his father's coat. Harper looked different than she had in the alley. Obviously, she was vertical, she was warm, her lips were their actual color. But it wasn't just that. There was a stillness to her now that hadn't been there before, a kind of deliberateness in the way she held herself, like someone who had come very close to a thing and come back from it and was still processing the distance. She was 17, he could see that clearly now. Maybe just turned 18. Young in the bone structure, older in the eyes. "Hey," Garrett said, "hey." She looked at the coat, then at him. "I know I already gave it back, but I wanted to. My dad brought it back to you, and I don't think that's the same as me bringing it back. It's the same coat either way." "That's not the point." She said it with a firmness that reminded him briefly of her father. "I wanted to give it back myself, and I wanted to say thank you myself. My dad said thank you for me, probably, but that's also not the same thing." "He didn't actually," Garrett said. "He asked questions." Something in her face shifted, not surprise, exactly more like recognition. "That sounds right." Garrett stopped. "Is he going to do something?" She finished it for him, and she did it without embarrassment or hedging. "Probably, I don't know what yet. He doesn't tell me things ahead of time, but yeah, when my dad says he's going to hear from someone, he means it." "I'm not looking for anything," Garrett said. Again, he'd said it twice now, and he meant it both times. "I know." She looked at him directly. "He knows that too, that's why." She started to take the coat off. "Keep it," Garrett said. She stopped. "It's your father's." "I know what it is." He reached out and pushed the lapel back toward her gently. "It kept you alive. My dad would have liked that. He was that kind of man." Harper stood very still. Then she pulled the coat back around herself and nodded once, and the nod was small, but it meant something he could tell. "What are you running from?" he asked. He hadn't planned to ask it. It came out the way honest questions came out when he wasn't managing himself carefully enough. She didn't answer right away. She looked at the floor, then back up at him. "Someone my dad trusted," she said. "Someone who was supposed to be." She stopped. "It doesn't matter. It's handled now." "Is it?" "My dad handles things," she said, and this time there was no ambiguity in it, no teenage uncertainty, just fact. Garrett nodded. She left and the coat went with her, and the garage felt ordinary again in the way a room feels ordinary after something extraordinary has passed through it. Travis came to stand next to him. "That's the Hells Angels' daughter," Travis said. "Yeah. And she's wearing your coat." "Yeah." Travis thought about this. "Man," he said, and went back to work. The call came Friday evening 9:15 when Garrett was eating soup from a can at his kitchen table and going through the Medallion credit partner statement he'd been avoiding for 6 days. The number was Montana, but not one he recognized. "Garrett Miller," he answered, because that was how he answered unknown numbers, his full name like a statement of presence. "This is Danny Reyes." The voice was even professional, not young. "I'm a friend of Richard Greer." Garrett didn't know either of those names. "Grip," the voice said, clarifying. "Okay," Garrett said. "He'd like to meet tomorrow, 11 in the morning. There's a place called the Landmark off Route 3. Do you know it?" "I know it." "He'll be there at 11. He'd appreciate it if you came." "Is this?" Garrett stopped. "Should I be bringing a lawyer?" A short pause. "Mr. Miller, if Richard Greer wanted to cause you a problem, you would already have a problem. This is not that." Garrett looked at the Medallion credit partner statement. The current balance with interest accrued was $141,200 and change. The minimum monthly interest payment was $2,590. He made $3,100 a month. "I'll be there," he said. He put the phone down and stared at the statement for a while. Then he folded it and put it back in the envelope because looking at it never made it smaller, and went to bed. The Landmark was a roadhouse that had been operating since the 1970s and looked at not in a bad way, just in the way that places look when they have absorbed enough years to stop trying to be anything other than what they are. Garrett got there at 10:55, and Grip was already at a booth in the back with a coffee and the same settled, unhurried quality he'd had in the garage. He was alone. Garrett had half expected otherwise. He sat down across from Grip, and a woman came and poured him coffee without asking and left. "You slept," Grip said. It sounded like an observation that was also an approval. "I did." "Good." Grip wrapped both hands around his mug. "I want to talk to you about a few things. First thing, Harper. She's okay. She's home. The doctors cleared her yesterday." Garrett felt something ease in his chest that he hadn't known was tight. "Good," he said. "She told me she went to see you. Wednesday. She wanted to return the coat herself." Grip nodded slowly. "She said you told her to keep it." She should keep it. Grip looked at him with an expression that Garrett was beginning to read, not warmth exactly, but a kind of serious attention, the kind that meant he was filing something away. My daughter doesn't trust easily, Grip said. Her mother left when she was 8. She grew up around men who were loyal to me in ways that weren't always safe for a kid to witness. She learned early that most people want something. She reads people the way I do. A pause. She trusts you. Garrett didn't know what to do with that, so he didn't do anything with it. He drank his coffee. Second thing, Grip said, and his voice shifted slightly, became more direct. I had some people look into your situation. Garrett set down his mug. I didn't ask for that, he said. No, you didn't. Grip's eyes didn't move. Medallion Credit Partners, $141,000. Your mother's dialysis and the complications from last spring's hospitalization. The number in someone else's mouth felt different than it did on paper. More real. Heavier. That's my business, Garrett said quietly. It is. Grip didn't argue it. I'm not in your business. I'm in a conversation with you, and in that conversation I'm telling you what I know because I don't like going into things sideways. He set down his mug. Medallion isn't a lender, it's a trap. 22% on a medical loan. They structure the payments so the principal barely moves. In 4 years at minimum payment, you'll still owe $120,000. Garrett knew this. He'd known it when he signed. He'd signed anyway because there was no other choice. And knowing a trap is a trap doesn't help you when the trap is the only door. I'm aware, he said. And Dale Hutchins, Grip said, he's been planning to sell Pioneer Garage since October. He's got 2 offers on the table. Neither buyer intends to keep the current staff. The coffee in Garrett's hand went very still. Dale hasn't told you, Grip said. No, he hasn't. The pieces moved in Garrett's mind quickly. Dale's slightly different energy lately, the way he'd been quieter in the office, the small signs Garrett had noticed and explained away, because explaining away was easier than confronting. When, Garrett said. End of the month, most likely. Maybe sooner. Garrett put the mug down on the table. His hands were steady. He was proud of that distantly. So I'm going to lose my job, he said. Yes. And I owe $141,000. Yes. And you're telling me this because you need to know what you're standing in before you can decide what to do about it, Grip said. And because I'm about to offer you something and I want you to understand that the offer isn't charity. It isn't pity. It isn't me throwing money at a problem because it makes me feel better. His voice was precise and serious and utterly without performance. You saved my daughter's life. In my world, that has a specific meaning, that has a weight to it that doesn't go away because time passes. You understand what I'm telling you. Garrett looked at him. You're talking about debt, Garrett said slowly. I'm talking about a code, Grip said. Yeah. The roadhouse was quiet around them. A cook was doing something in the kitchen. The coffee was good and the booth was old vinyl, and Garrett Miller sat in it across from a man who had ridden into his life with 11 other riders in a coat that used to belong to his father, and he understood with a cold, clarifying precision that whatever came out of this conversation was going to change the shape of things. What are you offering? He said. Grip looked at him steadily. Everything, he said, but that's a conversation for when you've had time to think about whether you want to be in one with me. He pushed a card across the table. No logo, just a number. Take a day, Grip said. Think about who you are and what you're willing to accept and what you're not. Then call that number. He stood up. He put cash on the table for the coffee. One more thing, he said. Garrett looked up. My daughter asked me to tell you something. Grip's face was unreadable but not closed. She said to tell you that your father sounds like he was a good man. He walked out. Garrett sat in the booth alone and looked at the card and looked at the cash on the table and looked at his own hands, and outside through the windows of the landmark, the Montana sky pressed down gray and cold and enormous, and somewhere across town his mother was at dialysis, and somewhere on the south side Dale Hutchins was maybe making a phone call Garrett wasn't supposed to know about yet. He picked up the card. He turned it over once. He put it in his shirt pocket against his chest and sat there finishing his coffee in the silence of a life that was about to turn a corner it had never known was there. He took the day. He took it seriously the way Grip had meant it, not as a polite formality, before an obvious answer, but as an actual reckoning. He went home from the landmark, and he sat at his kitchen table, and he thought about it the way his father had taught him to think about things that mattered, without rushing, without flinching, without dressing the truth up in something more comfortable than it was. The truth was this: he was 29 years old and he was drowning. Not metaphorically, literally, in the specific financial sense. That meant the water was over his head and the surface was getting further away, not closer, no matter how hard he kicked. He had $63 in his checking account. He had a debt that was designed structurally to never fully disappear. He had a job he was about to lose to a sale his boss hadn't bothered to mention. And he had a mother who needed dialysis 3 times a week for the rest of her life, and that was not going to change, and the bills attached to it were not going to stop. That was the ground he was standing on. On the other side of the card in his shirt pocket was a man who operated by a code that Garrett didn't fully understand but had seen enough of to know it was real. Not performance, not image. Grip had ridden 12 men into town, held a dead man's coat in his hands, and when he'd gotten the truth he'd wanted, he'd pivoted from potential violence to something that looked from the outside like honor. That wasn't nothing. That was, in Garrett's experience, genuinely rare. The question wasn't whether to call. The question was whether Garrett Miller was the kind of man who could accept help without it costing him the part of himself that had kept him upright through 4 years of drowning. He called at 7 the next morning. Danny Reyes answered on the second ring. He'll meet you at the garage. Monday, 8 a.m. before it opens. Okay, Garrett said. Bring your financial documents if you have them. The debt paperwork, everything. Garrett looked at the medallion envelope on his table. All right, he said on thumb. Monday came gray and cold, and Garrett was at Pioneer Garage at 7:45. He unlocked the front, turned the lights on, put the coffee on in the back office. The normalcy of it felt strange, the same motions he'd made 300 times in a space that now had a different quality to it. Like a room where something important had already happened, but the furniture hadn't caught up yet. Dale didn't know about the meeting. Garrett hadn't told him. He wasn't sure what he would tell Dale, or when that conversation was still somewhere ahead of him around a corner he hadn't reached. Grip arrived at 8 on the dot. This time there were only 2 bikes. Grip and one other man Garrett hadn't seen before, compact, maybe 45, dark hair going silver at the temples, wearing a vest, but no patches, carrying a leather portfolio that looked businesslike and out of place on him in the best possible way. This is Eddie Reyes, Grip said. Danny's brother. He handles things. Eddie Reyes shook Garrett's hand with a firm, dry grip and looked at him with the kind of eyes that had been doing math since they walked in. You bring the documents? Yeah. Garrett handed over the folder, the medallion statements, the original loan agreement, the collection notices, his last 3 pay stubs. Eddie took it to the workbench and opened it and began going through it with the focused quiet of someone who read financial documents the way Garrett read engine specs, fast, precise, knowing immediately what mattered and what didn't. Grip stood near the front of the garage, not watching Eddie work, watching Garrett. You called early, Grip said. I said I'd call, Garrett said. Most people take the full day, sometimes longer. I didn't need longer. Grip tilted his head slightly. What decided it? Garrett thought about how to say it honestly. My father used to say that when a man offers you something real, refusing it to protect your pride is just another kind of cowardice. A long beat. Smart man, Grip said. He was. Eddie looked up from the workbench. This loan agreement has a clause in Section 9 that's borderline predatory under Montana Consumer Protection Statute. The interest structure was misrepresented at signing. He looked at Garrett directly. Did anyone explain to you at closing that the minimum payment wouldn't cover accruing interest for the first 36 months? No, Garrett said. Did you ask? I asked if I could afford the payments. They said yes. Eddie looked back at the documents. They weren't wrong. You could afford the payments. They just didn't tell you the payments wouldn't actually reduce the debt for 3 years. He made a note on a small pad he'd produced from somewhere. This is workable. What does workable mean? Garrett said. It means there are mechanisms to address this that don't require Mr. Greer to simply write a check, Eddie said. He had a precise way of speaking, not cold, just exact. There are legal angles, negotiation angles, and direct settlement options. We'll pursue the cleanest one. Garrett looked at Grip. I want to understand what I'm agreeing to, specifically. Good, Grip said. You should. If this debt goes away, Garrett said carefully, what does that mean for me? What do you expect? Grip looked at him without blinking. Nothing. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I've got. Grip's voice was even. I'm not buying you. I'm not hiring you. I'm not putting you in a position where you owe me something that I can call in later. You saved my daughter. This is what that's worth in my world. It's not a transaction. It's not leverage. It's a debt paid. He paused. Now after this, if you want nothing more to do with me or mine, that's your right, and I'll respect it completely. If something develops different over time, that's a different conversation. But right now, today, I'm not asking for anything in return. The garage was quiet. Dale's selling this place, Garrett said. You told me that. Yes. End of the month. That's what my information says. Garrett looked around the shop, the lift, the tool chest, the coffee machine in the back, the Cherokee that was finally finished and waiting for pickup. 3 years of his life, every morning, every cold floor, every long Saturday. Is there anything you can do about that? He said. And then immediately, I'm not asking you to. I'm just asking if it's within what you do. Grip was quiet for a moment. He glanced at Eddie. Eddie was already looking at him. Pioneer Garage has 2 offers on it, a chain outfit from Bozeman and a real estate group that wants to rezone it commercial. Neither offer is exceptional. The property is worth more than both bids if it's properly represented. How do you know that? Garrett said. Because I looked, Eddie said simply. Grip looked back at Garrett. What do you want? He said, direct. No softening around it. Garrett felt the question land in the center of his chest. What did he want? He'd spent 4 years not asking that because asking it was a luxury for people who had options, and options were something he'd been running out of since the first hospital bill arrived. I want to keep working, he said. I'm good at this. I know engines. I know this shop. I know every regular who comes through that door and what their truck needs before they tell me. He stopped. I don't want to start over somewhere else at 30 with $140,000 of debt following me. Then don't, Grip said. Garrett stared at him. Eddie, Grip said. I can have a purchase offer structured by Wednesday. Eddie said, still not looking up from his notepad. Clean acquisition, fair market, no rezoning intent. Current staff retained. A brief pause. All current staff. The words went through Garrett like voltage. You're talking about buying the garage, Garrett said. I'm talking about ensuring the garage has the right buyer, Grip said. What happens after that is a separate question. Who owns it after? Grip looked at him steadily. That depends on how the paperwork gets structured. Eddie has thoughts. The cleanest structure, Eddie said, given the circumstances, would be a holding arrangement with operational control transferring to the current senior mechanic. He finally looked up. That would be you. The sentence took a moment to fully arrive. Garrett sat down on the stool next to the workbench. Not because he was weak, because his legs made a practical decision without consulting him. You're talking about giving me the garage, he said. I'm talking about putting you in control of the garage, Eddie corrected with the precision of a man who cared about words. The legal structure would be worked out properly, but operational authority decision-making day to day, yes, you. Garrett looked at Grip. Why, he said. Not gratitude, not protest, just the genuine question. Because my daughter is alive, Grip said. And because you're a man who takes half a mile in a Montana February without a coat and nearly dies doing it and doesn't tell anyone about it because you don't want to make your problem someone else's problem. He said it without sentimentality, just like a man reading facts aloud. I know what kind of man that is. I don't come across it often. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of things settling. Then the front door of the garage opened. Dale Hutchins walked in at 8:22, which was early for him, and stopped 3 steps inside when he took in the scene Garrett on the stool, a man he didn't know at his workbench with a leather portfolio, and Grip standing in the middle of his shop with the quality of someone who had already decided what happened here. Dale went pale. Not dramatically, just the particular paleness of a man who has walked into something he didn't expect and immediately understands he's not in control of it. Garrett, Dale said carefully. What's morning, Dale? Garrett said. Dale looked at Grip. Dale had lived in Billings long enough to know the vest. His eyes moved to the patch and then back to Garrett with a question in them that he didn't know how to ask out loud. Mr. Hutchins, Eddie said, standing up and extending his hand. My name is Edward Reyes. I represent a party that has an interest in acquiring Pioneer Garage. I understand you have active offers on the property. Dale blinked. Yes, I have offers. I haven't formally accepted anything yet. Good. Eddie reached into his portfolio and produced a document. Then you're in a position to consider one more. Dale took the paper and looked at it, and his face went through several things in quick succession. His eyes stopped about a third of the way down the page and stayed there, and Garrett knew without seeing it that they'd stopped on the number. This is Dale started. Above current market, yes, Eddie said. We feel the property is undervalued by the existing offers. Our number reflects what we believe is accurate valuation. Dale looked up at Garrett. Garrett held his gaze. There was a long moment where Dale was clearly doing math, not financial math, but human math. The calculation of what this meant and how he felt about it, and whether there was any version of this he was supposed to object to. Garrett watched him do it and felt no anger. Not really. Dale wasn't a bad man. He was just a man who had made a business decision without thinking about the human beings attached to it, which was a common kind of small failure. The staff, Dale said finally. Travis and Garrett. Would they? All current staff retained, Eddie said. That's a condition of the offer, not a courtesy. Dale looked at Grip one more time. Grip said nothing and didn't need to. I need to read this properly, Dale said, with my own people. Of course, Eddie said. We'll need a response by Thursday. Dale folded the document with the careful hands of a man managing himself, nodded at no one in particular, and walked back out the front door. The three of them were alone again in the garage. He'll sign, Eddie said quietly, already writing something else in his notepad. You don't know that, Garrett said. I know what that number does to a man who has two offers he's unhappy with. Eddie glanced at him. He'll sign by Wednesday. Grip was still watching Garrett. How are you doing, he said. It was such a plain question asked with such direct simplicity that Garrett almost laughed. I don't know, he said honestly. I think I need about an hour to catch up with what's happening. That's fair, Grip said. Can I ask you something? Yeah. The person Harper was running from, Garrett said. You said it was handled. Grip's expression didn't change, but something behind it did a tightening, very brief. It is. Was it someone in your, yes, Grip said, flat, closed, then after a beat, not anymore. Garrett didn't press it. Some doors told you everything you needed to know about what was behind them just by the way they were shut. She's going back to school next week. Grip said unprompted, and the unprompted quality of it told Garrett more than the sentence itself that this man who dealt in controlled information and precise exchanges had wanted to say something about his daughter and had needed a small opening to do it. She wants to study nursing. After this. A pause. After what happened? That tracks, Garrett said. Grip looked at him. How so? She was scared in that alley, but she wasn't out of it, Garrett said. She was still reading the situation, still deciding. She didn't panic, she was running low on time. That's different from panic. He thought about it. Someone who stays that clear when they're that cold and then decides they want to take care of people after, yeah. Nursing tracks. Grip was quiet for a long moment. She said you looked at her like a person, he said. Not like a problem, not like a situation. She said you looked at her like a person. The sentence moved through Garrett quietly. That's what she was, he said. The morning light shifted through the front windows the way winter light moved thin and slanted and honest. Eddie was packing up his portfolio. Grip was pulling on his gloves. Monday week, Grip said. If Dale signs, and he will, Eddie will need to sit down with you and go through the transition details. It'll take some time. There are structures to build properly. He paused at the door. And the debt medallion. Eddie's going to send them a letter this week. I want you to know that what happens next with them happens through legal channels. Clean. Okay, Garrett said. Nothing about any of this is outside the law, Grip said. It wasn't defensive. It was informational offered because it mattered to him that Garrett understood it. I want you clear on that. I believe you, Garrett said. Grip studied him one last time with those steady reading eyes. Your father, he said. What did he do? He was a mechanic, Garrett said. Something moved in Grip's face. Not a smile, something quieter and more durable than a smile. Of course he was, he said. He walked out. Eddie followed him, portfolio under his arm, already on his phone. Garrett stood alone in Pioneer Garage, his garage, or something that was in the process of becoming his garage, in a way he still couldn't fully hold in his head, and he stood there in the thin winter light, and breathed, and for the first time in 4 years, the air coming into his lungs didn't feel like it had to fight its way in. His phone buzzed. Text message, unknown number. He opened it. My dad doesn't say things like what he said about your father to people he doesn't mean it about. Just so you know, H. He read it twice. Then he put the phone in his pocket and walked to the back office to pour the coffee that had been sitting since 7:45, and he was halfway through the cup when Travis came through the front door shaking cold off his jacket and stopped. Why do you look like that? Travis said. Like what? Like something happened. Garrett drank his coffee. Dale's going to sell the shop. Travis's face dropped. Are you serious? To the right buyer, Garrett said. We're going to be fine. Travis stared at him. How do you know that? Garrett set down his cup and picked up the day's order tickets. Because I know who's buying it, he said. Now come on, we've got a full day. Travis looked at him for another 2 seconds with the expression of a 22-year-old who knew something had happened that he was not going to be fully told about, and then he grabbed his coveralls off the hook and got to work. And Garrett Miller, for the first time in longer than he could accurately remember, let himself think about next month, and the month after that. Not with dread, just with the plain, careful attention of a man who had suddenly, without expecting it, been handed a future. Dale signed on Tuesday, not Wednesday like Eddie had predicted, Tuesday afternoon at 4:17, which Garrett knew because Eddie sent him a text that said exactly that Hutchins sign. 4:17 p.m. Process begins Thursday. Nothing else. No exclamation point, no commentary, just the fact delivered the way Eddie delivered everything clean and without decoration. Garrett was under a Dodge Ram when the text came through. He read it lying on his back on the creeper with the exhaust system 3 inches from his face, and he lay there for a full 30 seconds, not moving, just reading it again. And then he slid out from under the truck and stood up and walked to the bathroom in the back of the shop and ran cold water over his hands and looked at himself in the mirror above the sink. He looked tired. He'd looked tired for so long that tired had become his default expression, the face he wore without thinking about it. But there was something else in the mirror now. Something that hadn't been there last week or the week before. Something that sat behind the tired like a light on in a room you'd assumed was empty. He dried his hands and went back to work. He didn't tell Travis that day. He wasn't ready to explain it yet, and explaining it meant making it real in a way that still felt precarious, like a thing you didn't name too loudly before it finished arriving. Travis noticed something. Travis always noticed something. The kid was sharper than he looked, but he read the room well enough to leave it alone. That night, Garrett drove to the care facility on the south side and sat with his mother for 3 hours. Carol Miller was 61 years old, and she'd been fighting her body for 4 of them. She was thin in a way that dialysis patients got thin, not fragile exactly, but reduced, like the illness had been taking small amounts of her at a time, and she'd been holding the line with everything she had. Her mind was sharp, sharper than his some days. She'd been a bookkeeper for 20 years, and she had the kind of precise, organized intelligence that didn't soften even when the body around it was struggling. She knew something was different the moment he walked in. You're standing different, she said. I'm standing the same way I always stand, Mom. You're standing like something happened. She studied him with the attention of a woman who had been reading her son for 29 years and had gotten very good at it. Good something or bad something, he sat down. He told her everything. He hadn't planned to. He'd thought he'd keep it general, keep it manageable, let the pieces solidify before he handed them to her. But she was looking at him the way she'd always looked at him when she was waiting for the truth, and the truth came out the way it always did with her completely. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. This man, she said. Grip. Yeah. You trust him. It wasn't a question. She'd heard enough to form her own read. I do, Garrett said. I can't fully explain why. But yeah. Carol looked at the window. Your father used to say that the most reliable people he ever met weren't always the most comfortable people to be around. A pause, he said the ones who made him a little nervous were usually the ones who meant exactly what they said. Dad had a lot of sayings. He was usually right. She looked back at Garrett. The coat. You gave that man's daughter your father's coat. I did. And now? Yeah. She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were bright in the specific way they got when she was managing something emotional with her bookkeeper's discipline, keeping it in columns, not letting it run. Baby, she said quietly. Don't, he said, because if she cried, he was going to lose the composure he'd been maintaining since Tuesday at 4:17, and he needed a few more days with it intact. She reached over and put her hand on his. They sat like that for a while without talking, which was its own kind of language between them, the shorthand of people who'd been through enough together that silence had texture. The debt, she said finally, it's being handled. By by Eddie Reyes, who apparently has a very specific understanding of Montana consumer protection law and a very low opinion of Medallion credit partners. He almost smiled. He sent them a letter Thursday. I don't know what the letter said. He told me not to worry about what the letter said. Carol was quiet. I hate that you carried that, she said, all this time. You were sick. You needed. I know what I needed. I hate that it fell on you the way it did. It didn't fall on me, Garrett said. I picked it up. She looked at him, and her eyes did the thing again, the bright, controlled thing, and this time she didn't fight it all the way down. Your father would be, she started. I know, he said. So proud of you. He held her hand and didn't say anything because there wasn't anything to say to that. That would be enough. Thursday came with Eddie Reyes in a briefcase and a table in the back office of Pioneer Garage, and 4 hours of documents that Garrett signed and initialed and dated until his hand was cramping and his eyes felt like sandpaper. Eddie walked him through every page with the same precise calm he brought to everything, explaining what each signature meant in plain language, without making Garrett feel stupid for needing the explanation. The structure was a holding company. Reyes and Associates, which was apparently a legitimate and long-standing entity, would hold the property. Garrett would hold the operational agreement, which functioned as controlling interest in everything that happened inside the building. In 2 years, if everything ran as projected, the property itself would transfer to Garrett outright. Eddie had built in an exit clause that protected Garrett if anything on the other side of the arrangement changed. It was, Eddie explained, structured specifically so that Garrett was never beholden in a way he hadn't explicitly agreed to. This is more protection for me than for your side, Garrett said somewhere around the 3rd hour. Yes, Eddie said. Why, wow. Because Mr. Greer asked me to structure it that way. Eddie turned a page. His words were, and I'm quoting because they were specific, I want the man to be able to walk away from this hole if he ever needs to. Eddie looked at him over the documents. So I built that in. Garrett sat back in the chair. There was a point at which you ran out of ways to process a person's consistency. Grip had been exactly who he appeared to be in every single interaction, and at some level that was the most disorienting thing about all of it. Not the money, not the power, not the 12 bikes on the street, but the fact that the man just kept meaning what he said. Okay, Garrett said and turned the page. Dale came in at noon not to interfere, but because it was still technically his shop until the transfer finalized, and he stood in the doorway of the office and watched for a moment, and then quietly made himself coffee and went back to his desk. He and Garrett hadn't had the conversation yet, the real one about why Dale hadn't told him about the months of not knowing while his life was being decided without him. Garrett wasn't sure he was going to have that conversation. He wasn't sure it would accomplish anything. Dale had made a business decision. Garrett had, through a chain of events that neither of them could have scripted, ended up on the right side of it. Sometimes the accounting of a situation just had to stop there. At 4 o'clock, when Eddie packed his briefcase and shook Garrett's hand and left, Garrett walked out to the main floor of the garage and stood in it. His garage, or close enough to his that the distinction was paperwork. Travis was changing the oil on a Subaru Outback and had the radio turned to something with guitars in it. The shop smelled like it always smelled, metal oil, coffee, the cold that came through the seams of the building. Everything exactly the same as it had been this morning, and nothing the same at all. Travis, Garrett said. Travis looked over. You're keeping your job, Garrett said. The shop has a new owner and your job is safe. Travis stared at him. Then, it's you, isn't it? Close enough. Travis put down his ratchet. He looked at Garrett for a long moment with an expression that cycled through several things. Surprise, relief, the particular emotion of someone realizing they'd been worried about something for longer than they'd admitted. Okay, Travis said finally. Okay, good. He picked up his ratchet. Does this mean I can ask for a raise? No, Garrett said. Worth a shot, Travis said, and went back to the Subaru. The call from Medallion Credit Partners came the following Monday. Garrett almost didn't answer. It was the 7 a.m. number, the collections number, the one he'd learned to feel in his stomach before he even picked up. but he answered because he was done running from phone numbers. Mr. Miller? The voice was different, not the usual collector's voice, older measured. My name is Warren Caldwell. I'm the director of loan operations at Medallion. I'm calling regarding your account. Okay, Garrett said. We received a communication from an attorney's office last week regarding your loan agreement. We're reviewing the matter internally. A pause that carried considerable discomfort in it. We'd like to discuss a settlement arrangement. Garrett kept his voice even. What kind of arrangement? A full settlement at significantly reduced principal. Another pause. We're prepared to accept 40 cents on the dollar for immediate resolution. 40 cents on the dollar. On a $141,000 debt, that was still $56,000, which was money Garrett didn't have. But he understood this phone call wasn't the final number. This was the opening position of a company that had received a letter from Eddie Reyes and was scared of what happened next. I'll have my attorney contact you, Garrett said. There was a silence on the other end that was extremely satisfying. You have an attorney, Warren Caldwell said. I do now, Garrett said. He hung up and called Eddie. They called, he said when Eddie picked up. I know. They called me first. 40 cents. Eddie's voice was dry. They'll go lower. Sit tight. How much lower? Let me do my job, Mr. Miller. Garrett sat tight. Eddie called back Wednesday afternoon. 15 cents on the dollar. They want a release of liability from our end and a non-disclosure on the loan structure specifics. I told them the release was negotiable and the non-disclosure wasn't. Why not the non-disclosure? Because making them nervous about disclosure is the only leverage we have. The moment we sign that, we lose it. A beat. They came back at 20 cents with the release only. 20 cents, Garrett said. That's $28,240, Eddie said, which Mr. Greer will handle directly. You'll receive documentation that the account is settled in full. Your credit file will show paid settled within 60 days. The number 28,000 was still enormous. The fact that it was being handled on his behalf was something he was still learning to hold without the reflexive guilt that came from a lifetime of handling everything himself. He was working on that. Tell them yes, Garrett said. Already did, Eddie said. Call you Thursday with the confirmation. It was Harper who told him what happened with the man she'd been running from. She came to the garage on a Saturday morning, 2 weeks after Dale had signed, 3 days after Medallion had confirmed the settlement in writing. She was in his father's coat, and she had the look of someone who had made a decision to say something and was going to say it before she talked herself out of it. The man I was running from, she said, his name was Kessler. He was my dad's treasurer. Garrett was cleaning a carburetor at the workbench. He kept his hands moving, but his attention went entirely to her. He'd been skimming from the club for 8 months, Harper said. My dad didn't know. Nobody knew except Kessler and me because I saw something I wasn't supposed to see. She paused. When Kessler realized I'd seen it, he told me if I said anything, he'd make sure my dad found out I'd been the one to. She stopped. He had leverage, or he thought he did. Something I'd done that my dad didn't know about. Stupid kid stuff, but enough. So you ran, Garrett said. I ran. She looked at her hands. I was trying to get to a woman in Billings, a friend of my mom's, the only person I could think of who was completely outside everything. But I took the wrong bus, and it was later than I thought, and the cold came down fast. A pause. And then you were there. What happened to Kessler? Garrett said. Her jaw set. My dad found out about the skimming and about the leverage Kessler tried to use on me. She said it without blinking. Kessler doesn't hold any position anymore. He's not in the picture. Garrett didn't ask what not in the picture meant in Grip's world. He had a functional understanding of what it probably meant, and he also had a clear sense of the limits of what he needed to know. Your dad knew, Garrett said. The stupid kid stuff. He already knew. Harper looked at him sharply. He's known for a while, Garrett said. That's my guess. He didn't say anything because he was waiting for you to come to him. And Kessler picked the wrong leverage because it was never leverage at all. Harper was very still. He never said he wouldn't, Garrett said. That's not how from what I can tell, that's not how he operates. He waits. He gives people the chance to get there themselves. She sat with that. Her face was doing something complicated and young and real. He's not, she started then restarted. People think he's just the vest, the bikes, they think that's all there is. I don't think that, Garrett said. I know. She looked at him. That's why he likes you. The word likes landed with a specificity that told Garrett it wasn't casually chosen, that coming from Grip, relayed through Harper, it meant something concrete. Can I ask you something? Harper said. Yeah. When you found me in that alley, were you scared of what would happen if... No, Garrett said. Then honestly, I was cold. Mostly I was just cold and tired. I didn't think far enough ahead to be scared. She almost smiled. That's the most honest answer I've ever gotten from anyone about anything. It's a low bar. It really isn't, she said. She stayed for 40 minutes. They talked about nursing school. She'd been accepted to a program in Missoula starting in the fall. She talked about it the way people talked about things they decided on, from the inside out, not from external pressure or expectation, but from something that had rearranged itself in them. The hospital, she said, those 3 days, the nurses who had come in every few hours and checked on her and talked to her like she was a person and not just a patient. She'd watched them work, and something had clicked into place. Your dad told me that tracks, Garrett said. He said that he did. She looked surprised, and then not surprised, and then something in her face went soft in the specific way faces went soft when someone said something true about a person you loved and you hadn't expected them to see it. When she left, Garrett stood at the front window and watched her walk to her truck. Newer F250 dark blue grips, doing almost certainly, and she stopped before she got in and turned back and raised one hand, not quite a wave, more like an acknowledgement. He raised his back. She got in and drove away, and the street was quiet again. Travis appeared at his shoulder. She was here again, Travis observed. She was. Is she going to keep coming around? Garrett thought about it. The coat on her shoulders, his father's initials in the tag, the nursing program in Missoula. The way she'd said, that's the most honest answer I've ever gotten, like it was something rare and worth noting. I don't know, he said. Probably. Is that a problem? No, Garrett said. It's not a problem. He went back to the carburetor. The Saturday moved, the way Saturdays moved in a working garage, steady and full. The kind of busy that had a rhythm to it, one job finishing and the next one pulling in, the radio playing through the afternoon, the coffee getting made and drunk and made again. Travis was good company, not loud, not needy, just present the way good coworkers were present there when the work needed two sets of hands, quiet when it didn't. At 5 o'clock, when they were closing up, Garrett's phone rang. The number was Grip's. He had it in his contacts now under the name Richard Greer, because that was who he was, the actual name of the actual man. And Garrett had decided early that if he was going to be in relationship with this person, he was going to relate to the person, not the reputation. Everything finalized, Grip said. Eddie confirmed the medallion settlement Thursday, Garrett said. Paperwork for the garage is moving. Travis knows he's staying. My mother knows what's happening. He paused. Everything's finalized. A beat. How's she doing? Grip said. Your mother. The question caught Garrett somewhere he hadn't expected it to land. Nobody asked about Carol Miller. The collectors didn't ask. Dale hadn't asked. The question was so plain and so direct and so human that it took him a half second to know what to do with it. She's better, he said. She's knowing the debt's going away changed something for her. She'd been carrying it too, even though she tried not to show me that. He stopped. She's better. Good, Grip said. Silence. Not uncomfortable. Just the silence of two men who didn't fill space with noise. Harper told me she came to the shop today, Grip said. She did. We talked for a while. She's doing better too, Grip said. There was something in his voice when he talked about Harper, not soft exactly, but less armored, less controlled, like whatever mechanism he used to manage his own presentation didn't quite work when the subject was his daughter. She's got more color in her. Eating again. She talked about nursing school, Garrett said. She's excited. Yeah, a pause. She is. She's going to be good at it, Garrett said. Another beat. Yeah, Grip said again. And then after a moment where Garrett could almost feel him deciding something, I want to bring some people by the garage next week. Not business, just to introduce you. People in my world who are going to know your name now anyway. Better if they know your face. Garrett understood what that meant. In Grip's world, known and protected were the same sentence. Okay, he said. Wednesday, around noon. There'll be maybe 8, 10 of them. I'll make sure there's coffee, Garrett said. A short sound came through the phone that wasn't quite a laugh, but was the closest thing to one Garrett had heard from the man. Do that, Grip said, and hung up. Garrett locked the front door of the garage and turned off the shop lights one by one, and stood for a moment in the almost dark, in the space that had his name on it now in every way that mattered, and felt the day settle around him like something earned. His phone buzzed. Text. Harper. Dad said you told him I'd be good at nursing. He's been in a weirdly good mood all afternoon, and I think it's your fault. He typed back guilty. 3 seconds later, don't tell him I said the weirdly good mood thing. He put the phone in his pocket and walked out into the Montana evening, which was cold and clear and enormous. The way Montana evenings were the kind of sky that made you aware of your own small size without making you feel small. He stood outside the door of his garage and breathed the cold air all the way in. It didn't fight him anymore. Wednesday came and Grip brought 10 men. Garrett had made coffee, 2 full pots, the good kind, not the burnt stuff that sat on the burner too long. And he'd told Travis that morning that some people were coming by at noon, and Travis had looked at him with the expression of a man who had learned over the past 3 weeks that some people coming by at noon in Garrett Miller's life had a specific quality to it that required a certain kind of readiness. How many? Travis said. 10, maybe 11. Bikes, probably. Travis nodded slowly. I'll make sure the front bay is clear. He heard them before he saw them, the same layered rumble that had announced itself 3 weeks ago on an ordinary Thursday morning that turned out to be anything but ordinary. 10 motorcycles this time without the military formation, looser the way men rode when they weren't making a statement, but just moving together, which was its own kind of statement, but softer. They came in through the front and filled the garage the way a large group fills a space not chaotically, but with an immediate reorganization of the air in the room, the sense that the dimensions had shifted slightly. Grip was last through the door, and he moved to the front of the group without any signal or ceremony, the way leadership worked when it was real instead of performed. Garrett Miller, Grip said to the room. Not an introduction exactly, more like a fact being entered into a record. 10 men looked at Garrett. Their ages ranged from maybe 30 to somewhere past 60. Their faces were the faces of men who had lived outdoors and worked with their hands and carried things that didn't show from the outside. Some of them nodded. One of them, a broad, quiet man with a silver beard who looked to be in his mid-50s, extended his hand without waiting for anyone to prompt him. Ray, he said, I heard about the coat. Word travels, Garrett said, shaking it. In this group, it does. Ray's grip was the grip of a man who'd spent 40 years using his hands. You did right. He stepped back, and the others moved forward in the casual sequence of men who knew how to introduce themselves without making it a production. Names landed Hatch Domino Sully Cruz, a younger man named Webb, who couldn't have been more than 25, and looked at Garrett with a particular attention that suggested he was still figuring out what the story meant. Each handshake was its own transaction, brief, direct, complete. Travis stood near the back wall with his coffee and watched all of it with the focused stillness of a man filing away an experience he was going to be thinking about for a long time. When the introductions were done, the group spread out naturally, some at the coffee, some looking at the shop with the eye that men who knew machinery always brought to a garage, reading the organization of the tool, chess and the lift capacity, and the makes of the vehicles in the bays with the same unconscious assessment. A carpenter gave a job site. Grip came to stand next to Garrett at the workbench. Ray's been with me 22 years, Grip said quietly. He doesn't extend his hand to people he doesn't respect. He waits to be introduced. Always. He came to me first, Garrett said. I know. Grip picked up a socket from the bench, turned it over once, set it back down. These men are going to send their vehicles here. Some of them travel long distances for reliable work. You'll have more business than you know what to do with inside of 2 months. He said it without fanfare, just logistics. Eddie's going to help you structure the staffing expansion. You'll need at least 2 more mechanics. Garrett processed this. More business? Staffing expansion. The words had a scale to them that required a different kind of thinking than the one he'd been doing for 3 years, the survival thinking, the how do I get through this month thinking. This was build thinking. He hadn't used those muscles in so long, they felt unfamiliar. I know a guy, he said, former Army good with engines, been looking for steady work. His name's Pete Callahan. Talk to him, Grip said. If he's good, hire him. I don't need your approval to hire someone. Grip looked at him. Something moved in his expression, not displeasure, the opposite. No, he said, you don't. The morning ran until almost 2. The men drank coffee and talked shop, and Webb asked Garrett intelligent questions about the lift system and the exhaust work on a Harley he'd been struggling with, and Garrett answered them with the same directness he brought to any mechanical question. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, he realized that the dynamic in the room had stopped being about what had happened in February and had become something more ordinary and more durable. Men in a garage talking about the work the way men had talked about the work in garages since there were garages. When they left, Grip was the last out the door again. He stopped with one hand on the frame. Harper's leaving for Missoula in 6 weeks, he said. She told me. She's ready. Grip was quiet for a moment. She's going to want to stay in touch. She doesn't have a lot of people. She's selective. Always has been. Her mother's people are scattered, and my world isn't always the right environment for a young woman trying to build something clean. He paused. I want her to have people outside of what I am. Garrett understood what was being asked without it being asked. She knows where the garage is, he said. Grip held his gaze for 3 seconds. Yeah, he said. She does. He left. The rumble built and faded and the street went quiet. Travis appeared at Garrett's shoulder, holding his empty coffee mug like a prop he'd forgotten he was holding. So, Travis said, that happened. That happened, Garrett agreed. We're going to need more coffee, Travis said, like structurally, as a business. I'll order a better machine, Garrett said, and probably a third lift. Probably. Travis looked at the empty bays in the full parking lot outside and the order tickets on the board. You know I'm going to need that raise eventually. Give me 60 days, Garrett said. Travis smiled, the genuine, unguarded kind. Deal. He called Pete Callahan that evening. Pete was 34, ex-Army, 2 tours in Afghanistan, currently working at a tire shop on the north side for $11 an hour. They'd known each other since high school, had lost touch the way men lost touch when life got loud, and had run into each other at a gas station 6 months ago and exchanged numbers with the vague intention of having a beer sometime that neither of them had acted on. Pete picked up on the third ring. Hey, stranger. You still working at Henson's? Garrett said. Yeah, unfortunately. Why? I've got a job if you want it. Pioneer Garage senior mechanic. I can do $15 an hour to start benefits in 90 days. Real benefits. Silence. Garrett, Pete said carefully, you work at Pioneer. You don't run Pioneer. I do now, Garrett said. A longer silence. You're serious? I'm serious. What happened? Long story, you want the job? Yes, Pete said immediately. When Monday. Done. A beat. Can I ask what happened? I gave someone my coat, Garrett said. Pete waited for more. More didn't come. That's all you're going to give me, for now. Man, Pete said, you're weird. But he was smiling. Garrett could hear it. Monday, I'll be there. The weeks that followed had a quality that Garrett hadn't experienced in so long, he kept reaching for words to describe it and coming up short. Not happiness exactly, or not only that, more like correctness, like a machine that had been running with a misaligned component that had finally been reset and was now running the way it was designed to run, smooth and even, and without the constant low-level grinding that you stopped hearing only when it stopped. Pete started Monday, and within 3 days, Garrett understood that hiring him had been one of the better decisions he'd made because Pete worked the way men worked when they took pride in the thing itself, and not just the paycheck, thorough, focused, honest about what he didn't know and fast to learn it. He and Travis developed their own rhythm inside of a week, the kind of workplace dynamic that either happened or it didn't, and in this case it did. The business from Grip's men started coming in the second week. Ray brought his Road King in for a complete brake overhaul and stayed for 2 hours talking to Pete about engine rebuilds while Garrett worked, which was fine, which was exactly fine because this was what a working garage sounded like when it was alive. Hatch sent 3 of his personal vehicles, a truck, a Jeep, a vintage Bronco that had a transmission issue that took Garrett 2 days to fully diagnose and another day to fix, in which he loved every minute of. Webb came in with the Harley he'd asked about, and Garrett had spent a Saturday morning on the exhaust problem, while Webb watched and asked questions and left with the bike running clean and a look on his face like a man who'd received something worth receiving. The medallion settlement finalized on a Thursday at the end of February, exactly 3 weeks after Eddie's first letter. The document arrived by courier, a thick envelope with legal letterheading, and inside it a single page that said in the formal language of financial institutions performing accountability, they had not volunteered for that account number, 7741-MC-2209, in the name of Garrett R. Miller, had been settled in full. Below that, in slightly smaller font, the words balance zero. He read it twice. He put it down on the kitchen table. He picked up his phone and called his mother. "It's done," he said when she answered. Carol Miller didn't say anything for a moment. The silence on her end had a texture to it, the texture of 4 years of worry releasing all at once, which wasn't loud. It was the opposite of loud. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay, baby." "Okay," he said. They stayed on the phone for 10 minutes, not saying much. That was enough. That was everything. Tiatam. Harper came to the garage the Friday before she left for Missoula. It was late afternoon. The shop was wrapping up its last jobs of the day. Pete and Travis were doing the end-of-day cleanup with the radio on, and Garrett was in the back office going through the week's numbers, which were better than good numbers, that belonged to a different kind of life than the one he'd been living when he heard Travis say, "Hey, Garrett, someone's here." He came out and she was standing near the front in his father's coat, and she had a duffel bag over one shoulder and the look of a person in the middle of moving the unsettled but purposeful energy of departure. "I'm driving out tomorrow morning," she said. "Early. I wanted to come by before." "You didn't have to," he said. "I know." She held his gaze with the directness she'd had from the first night, even half frozen in an alley. "I wanted to." Pete and Travis found reasons to be elsewhere in the shop, which Garrett appreciated. "You nervous," he said. "About nursing school?" "About all of it. New city, new program, being away." She considered it honestly. "Yeah, some, but it's the good kind of nervous. The kind that means you're going towards something instead of away from something." "That's a real distinction," Garrett said. "Your alley taught me that," she said. "I know that sounds—" "It doesn't sound like anything," he said. "It sounds true." She reached into the duffel and took something out and held it toward him. He looked at it. It was his father's coat. Not worn or tired, she'd had it cleaned. He could tell the fabric sitting differently, the forest green brought back to something closer to its original depth. She'd had a small repair done to the left front pocket lining the one he'd torn years ago and never fixed. He could see the neat stitching along the seam. "Harper," he started. "I had it for 2 months," she said. "I'm not taking it to Missoula. It belongs to you, and it's always belonged to you, and you were never going to ask for it back because you're you. So I'm giving it back." She pushed it further toward him. "Your father's name is in the tag. It should be with his son." He took it. The weight of it was exactly what it had always been. The particular heaviness of a good winter coat broken in over years, shaped by the man who'd worn it first and then the man who'd worn it after. He held it and didn't say anything for a moment, because there wasn't anything to say that would be proportionate. "Thank you for having it clean," he said finally. "Thank you for putting it around my shoulders in a February alley," she said. "That's a slightly larger thing." "Slightly," he agreed. She smiled. It was the first time he'd seen her actually smile, not the almost smile from the diner conversation, not the tight acknowledgement from the garage visits, but a real one, open and unguarded and young in the best sense of the word. "My dad wants to come by," she said. "Next week sometime. Just not business. He said he wanted to see the garage running right." "He's welcome anytime." "He knows. He wanted me to tell you first. He said it was the polite thing." She paused. "He doesn't always know what the polite thing is, so when he figures it out, he usually does it." "Tell him the coffee machine is better now," Garrett said. "Travis made a case for it." She laughed, out loud, briefly, genuinely. "I'll tell him." She shifted the duffel strap on her shoulder. The leaving was arriving the way leavings did in the body. First, the small physical adjustments of a person preparing to go. "Garrett," she said. "Yeah. What you did that night, I know you said your dad would have done the same thing, and maybe he would have. But you did it. You." She met his eyes directly. "That matters. The person who does the thing is the thing, not the lesson they learned from their dad." He stood with that. "Go to school," he said. "Be a good nurse." "I will," she said. No hesitation. Just the clean certainty of someone who knew exactly what they were going to do and was ready to do it. She walked out. He stood at the front window and watched her get into the blue F250 and pull out of the lot, and the truck turned left onto 2nd Street and was gone. Pete materialized next to him, looking out the same window. "She the Hells Angels girl," Pete said. "Yeah." "She's something," Pete said. Not flirtatiously, observationally. The way you said it about a person who had made an impression. "She is," Garrett said. He put the coat on. It settled onto his shoulders exactly the way it always had. The weight distributed just right, the collar sitting the way a collar sat when a coat had been worn long enough to learn the shape of the person inside it. His father's coat. RM scratched in blue ballpointed inside the tag. He reached up and touched the newly repaired pocket lining and felt the neat row of Harper's stitches under his fingertips. Travis looked over from across the shop. He saw the coat and he didn't say anything. Just nodded once, the small nod of a 22-year-old who understood more than he usually let on. Garrett went back to the office and finished the week's numbers. They were good. They were genuinely, concretely good. The kind of numbers that meant the third lift was not just possible but scheduled, that Pete's raise was coming before the 90 days he'd been promised, that Carol Miller's next dialysis bill was going to get paid from a checking account that had more than $63 in it. He closed the folder and sat back in the chair. Grip came the following Tuesday. He came alone, no other bikes, no Eddie, no formation. Just a man on a Harley who parked in the front lot and walked in and stood in the middle of Pioneer Garage and looked at it the way a man looked at something he'd had a hand in and wanted to see running right. It was running right. Both lifts occupied Pete under a transmission, Travis on brakes, the radio on the coffee, hot the board full of order tickets, the particular productive noise of a shop that had enough work and good people to do it. Grip stood there for a long moment without speaking. Then he looked at Garrett. "Good," he said. Just that. One word. But Garrett had learned by now the specific weight that single words carried when this man chose them, and good meant something precise, and considered meant the thing is what it should be, means I see it and I'm satisfied, means the decision was right. "You want coffee?" Garrett said. "Yeah." They went to the back office and Garrett poured, and they sat down across from each other and didn't immediately say anything, which was a thing that had become possible between them over these weeks, the absence of the need to fill every silence with words. "Harper called me last night," Grip said. "She's in her dorm. She likes her roommate." "That's good. She sounds different." He turned the mug in his hands. "Lighter." A pause. "She hasn't sounded like that since she was small." Garrett didn't say anything. Some things only needed to be witnessed. "I've been doing what I do for 30 years, Grip said. I've built things and protected things and made decisions that not everyone would agree with. I've operated in a world that has its own rules." He looked at his hands. "And in 30 years, I have never had a stranger give something real to someone I loved with no expectation of anything in return." He looked up. "I didn't know what to do with that. First time in a long time, something caught me without a plan." "You handled it all right," Garrett said. "I handled it eventually." The corner of his mouth moved. "Took me a minute in that garage." "You handled it fine," Garrett said. Grip looked at him steadily. "My daughter is safe and healthy and in school and sounds like herself again. Your mother's debt is gone. You're running a shop that's going to be yours free and clear inside of 2 years." He set the mug down. "None of that happened because of money or power or what I can do in this town. All of it happened because a 29-year-old mechanic gave away his father's coat on a night when he had nothing to spare." He was quiet for a moment. "I want you to know I understand that. The way it started. I want you to know I don't take it lightly." Garrett held his gaze across the desk. "Richard," he said, first time he'd used the name, and Grip registered it, a small stillness in him. "Neither do I." A beat. "Two." "Good," Grip said. He finished his coffee. He stood up. He shook Garrett's hand, the same firm, complete handshake that Ray had given him on Wednesday. The handshake of men in Grip's world that meant something, had been established, and was not going to be taken back. He walked out through the shop. He stopped at the door and looked at Pete, and then at Travis. "You two," he said. "You work for a good man." Pete looked at Garrett. Travis looked at Garrett. "Yes, sir," Travis said. "We know." Grip walked out. The Harley started that single distinct engine and pulled out of the lot and turned onto 2nd Street and was gone. The shop was quiet for about 4 seconds. "Okay," Pete said. Now you have to tell me the whole story. Get back to work, Garrett said. There's a transmission waiting on you, Pete. Pete looked at Travis. Travis spread his hands. He's like this, Travis said. You get used to it. Garrett put on his coat and walked to the front of the shop and stood just inside the door for a moment, looking out at the lot at 2nd Street, at the particular gray-blue of a Montana afternoon that had decided to be almost beautiful about it today. He thought about a February night in a back alley and a girl with blue lips who was so scared she could barely form words. He thought about the walk home with no coat and the cold that had gotten into him and the shower on the bathroom floor. He thought about 12 bikes on a Tuesday morning and his father's coat in a stranger's hands, and the question, did you touch her, that had been the hinge point of everything. He thought about his mother's face in the care facility when he told her the debt was gone. He thought about Harper's neat stitches along the pocket seam. He thought about his father, who had been a mechanic in a town like this one, who had worn this coat for years before he did, whose initials were still in the tag RM. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who understand loyalty the most. And sometimes a man who has nothing left to give reaches into himself and finds the thing that matters anyway and gives it and walks away into the cold without looking back. And that single act, that one unremarkable moment in a dark alley on a night that was trying to kill everything that moved, becomes the first stone of a foundation strong enough to build a life on. Garrett Miller zipped his father's coat to the collar, turned from the door, and went back to work.